I just wanted to ask a few questions in relation to the employment of his former senior media advisor.
Yes.
Still muckraking, I can see.
Order.
Beg your pardon?
Still muckraking. And outside the terms of reference.
Order. Mr. Fang, we've already discussed this. Order.
Come on, Robert.
Order.
Just started now.
Oh, Robert.
Let's just continue. Ms. Sharp.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you able to give us sort of an approximate date? And I know I'm not necessarily know a precise date when Mr. Barilaro contacted you in relation to a job for his senior media advisor.
Thank you for your question. I have tried to source that from my phone records. I've been unable to. Sorry. However, she was engaged via Contractor Central to commence a contract appointment with us on the 16th of August 2021, and I expect that we were sourcing candidates, so to speak, for that role immediately prior to that. So it was about that time.
And do you recall do you recall the contact with Mr. Barilaro in relation to this?
I do.
And was it a text or a phone call?
It was a phone call.
And do you recall what Mr. Barilaro said to you in relation to this?
He said that there was a senior media advisor in his office who was looking for new opportunities, and that he'd heard through the grapevine that we were building out our media and communications team. I said to him, that is likely to be the case, but she's welcome to sort of apply for opportunities, and my head of media and communications is making those arrangements. So,
and do you think that he would have known this via Mr. Brayford, or how do you think, or just? Would you have ever mentioned to him that you were putting more people on? What's the? I
think my head of media and communications is well networked within other people who work in media and communications, particularly for the government. Mm-hmm. So this media advisor may well have heard it through the grapevine from my head of communications. And
just to clarify, Mr. Barilaro made no comments in relation to any relationship he had with the senior media advisor other than a professional one.
That's no comments other than a professional relationship, yes.
And when she came to work for your agency, is there a requirement for there to be declarations in relation to that employment?
Right. So she wasn't actually employed by Investment New South Wales. She was contingent labour, and contingent labour hires remain employees of the relevant recruitment agency. So she was engaged with us as contingent labour hire. Via this pre-qualified agency, she remained their employee. However, and so any kind of referee checking and conflict declarations and so on were with that company as her employer. But at some point, we did actually ask whether or not conflict declarations had been made.
Do you recall when that was?
It was approximately, certainly in December 2021.
And was there a reason why, I mean, she'd obviously been there since August, why you decided at that period of time to ask about this?
We saw a report in the media, and although it was speculative, it concerned us enough to pick up the phone to her employer and ask whether or not she had made a conflict declaration, and requested that if there was a conflict of interest declaration, that one could be provided to us. But we don't actually have records of that happening, most likely because we finished up her employment with us on the 22nd of December, which was only a number of days after.
Yeah, sorry, but you basically, so the recruitment firm, labour hire firm, weren't able to confirm with you whether there had been a declaration made, or they just never got around to sending one to you?
I believe they couldn't confirm on the spot, and they never followed up with us, most likely because the contract ended.
Okay.
I just have one question. Yeah. Ms. Brown, in your very first appearance before us, you talked about the lack of contact that you had with Mr. Barilaro when he was the relevant minister. I think you mentioned one Teams meeting. Is that correct?
3 phone calls and 1 Teams meeting. 3 phone calls and 1 Teams meeting. And one of those 3 phone calls was him calling you and saying, you've got this opportunity. I'd like you to consider someone in my office. Is that precisely
correct? Okay. Thanks very much.
And I just wanted to ask, you said the head of media and communications in your agency was well networked in government. Had they previously worked on the ministerial office side?
Yes, she had.
And for whom did that head of media and communications work?
She worked for Minister Stuart Ayres.
Thank you.
Secretary Brown, firstly, just thank you for coming back. We appreciate that.
Third time's a charm, Mr.
Indeed. I'm just going to continue on with this line of questioning, if you don't mind. By any chance, forgive me if I'm stretching your patience here, but have you by any chance brought back your tender bundle from the other day?
It's not about this either, but anyway.
No, I apologise. We're having a document printed for you as we speak.
Okay.
To be brought down from that tender bundle, just in case anyone from the government side, just because it's only come to hand. I am referring to pages 19 to 26 of the documents we tendered on the 3rd of August last week. Miss Secretary Brown, was this the person, how should we refer to it?
Senior media advisor.
Senior media advisor employed, oh, excellent. Can we provide to the witness?
Do you know which page?
Yeah, 19 to 26.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart.
Thank you to the Secretary to the rescue. Do you want to just turn to the page?
19.
Yeah. Starting from 19, but perhaps, Secretary, it's better to start from page 23.
Yep.
Because we're going to work our way up an email chain.
Yes.
You good?
I'm with you.
Thank you. You can see that this is an email chain that's on page, starts at the bottom of page 22 and goes over to 23. So I think it's probably best you start on 22. Mm-hmm. You see that this is a person who I don't know, making an email to 2 members of, I think, Minister Ayres' staff. You see that? CCing Ms Bell, 2 others, and media at investmentnewsouthwales.gov.au.
Sure.
Who was running the media at investmentnewsouthwales.gov.au account?
I'd need to take that on notice.
Okay, that's fine, no problems. But I presume the senior media advisor would have access to that account?
I'd need to take it on notice.
Okay, no problems. You see here, it just says, this is a pretty innocuous email. It says, "Hi both, thanks for your time just then. Please see attached our draft of the Sticks announcements for your consideration." You see that?
Yes.
Okay, so, and you can see on page 24 and 25 the actual drafts that were being sent to consideration. They're the actual media releases, which are not really material. But that's what's attached. If you don't mind working up, let's go back up to the middle of page 2022 to the email sent by the Associate Director of Communications and Media and Engagement.
Got it?
The reply says to suggest a tweak to the attached as I think the order reads clearer. Again, not pretty innocuous.
Looks good, yep.
Just go up again, and it goes, this is now the reply from Minister Ayres' advisor, who I presume is a media advisor. And she goes, "Thanks all, it's with the Minister now." You see that?
Yes.
Okay, let's go forward to the next, forward up to page 21. None of this, the email that Miss Bell sends at 3:53 is immaterial. The email that Miss Bell also sends at 8:45 is immaterial, but you can see that at the bottom of page 20, over to 21, you can see the Policy Director in Mr Ayres' office's replies to Miss Bell. "Thanks, Kylie. The Minister is currently reviewing the media release. Can I confirm we're still waiting on Vish's signature, which is due to occur today?" I presume that's a reference to the stick appointment in Mumbai.
Yes.
Yes. Can we go to page 19 now? So you see here, "Hi, Sophie and Ellen." And then over the page is, she goes, or this person goes, yes, I think it might be a she, goes, "We understand the Minister has given feedback via Amy that he would like to see the remaining recruitment would be finalised before the end of the year. However, this is not the case as both Americans and China's will be Q1. We've amended the attached and I've made minor tweaks to take an errant word out."
Sure.
Yep, again, relatively innocuous, I think. But just go up to page 19.
Yep.
See the highlighted section?
Yep.
Says this, one edit made. "The Minister was keen for the recruitment to be advertised this year," which it is, "so I've included some weasel words to put that beyond doubt. Otherwise, this is fine by me. We will leave Soph to finalise." That's on the 9th of December 2021.
Okay.
And you can see, I presume that that's a reference, because at this point in time, the only jobs that need to be advertised are the Americas and the China position, so I presume that's correct?
Correct.
So the jobs that the Minister was keen for recruitment to be commenced or advertised this year
Yes.
was the Americas position, correct?
Yes.
And this is an email that is sent sent on the 9th of December 2021, correct?
Yep.
That is 8 days prior to the public advertisement. Is that when the decision was made to start the search for the Americas position or thereabouts, to recommence the actual advertisement?
What do you mean by decision was made to start the search?
Well, as in to press go, for want of a better term, on the advertisement and to recommence the search.
Yes, I can't say when we decided to press go. That would have been the subject of a lot of conversation. But you're right that it was re-advertised on the 17th of December, so this would have been in the lead up.
Yep, and just to be very clear, the Minister was keen for recruitment to be commenced advertised this year, which it is.
Yes.
And that could only have been the Americas and China's position, correct?
Yep.
Okay, can you just go to the very top, the header? From Investment New South Wales Media forwards this to many people. You see that?
Yes.
You can see one of the people whom this email chain is forwarded to is Jennifer Lugsden. Do you see that?
Correct.
So, Ms. Lugsden knew, we can infer that, and to be fair to her, so did the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. They knew, she would have known at least by the 10th of December that Minister Ayres had made a decision to commence the advertising this year. Is that a fair inference?
Assuming she read that email, yes.
Was sent to her, though. It was sent to her, though. You're confirming that's clearly what it shows.
And it's reasonably, sorry, Ms. Brown, you have to respond verbally. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But also, we still need to get to the bottom of who has access to the Investment New South Wales media account, because it's also possible that that's how people become aware too.
Fair enough.
If it's possible we can get access to that information this afternoon, that would be helpful.
I'll take it on notice, and if we can revert this afternoon, we will.
And can I, without naming them, can I just confirm that that first person to whom the email is sent is is your head of media and communications,
That is correct.
a former ministerial staffer for Stuart Ayres, to whom Jennifer Lugsden reported. Is that inaccurate?
Oh, I don't know about Ms. Lugsden's career history. I don't know who she worked for.
No, sorry. Oh, well, let me put it to you in two parts.
At this time.
That is your head of media and communications who formerly worked for Stuart Ayres, that's correct, at the top of that email. And is that to whom Ms. Lugsden reported while she worked in this role?
She actually reported to the Associate Director for Media and Investment.
And then through to this person?
It would ultimately feed through to this person, yes, because they were the head of it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Secretary, you're quite right in saying that your foresight about us wanting to just establish some further facts around the Agent General position was pretty spot on. So I might just, if you don't mind, unless you have
to the media. So, yeah.
Sorry, Wes?
You've telegraphed it enough to the media.
Order. If we could just ignore the interference as much as possible, and if a genuine point of order is taken, I'll hear it. Continue, Mr. McKee.
Thank you. Just forgive me, Ms. Brown, as I change folders.
Same.
You'll be pleased to know I haven't got 400 pages for you today, but can we just establish some of the basic facts here again? We have established, I think, that the original process around the design of Global New South Wales was developed by the New South Wales Treasury at first instance, that's correct?
Yes.
And then upon the formation of Investment New South Wales, the process transfers, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Brown, I don't expect you to necessarily be across all this, but we have started examining some of the early history here around the Agent General position, and we've established that some form of a recruitment process was embarked upon by the Treasury in 2020. Is that also accord with your understanding?
That's what I heard as well, yes.
And that process, it's fair to say we haven't established precisely how many processes there were in that period of time, but we've definitely established that there was at least one. Mm-hmm. But it's fair to say that that process did identify someone who was a preferred candidate, that's correct?
My documentation reflects that, yes.
But the person who ends up being the preferred candidate isn't the person who actually gets the job, that's correct?
My documentation reflects that also.
Okay. So we will have to get more into that in subsequent hearings. And to be fair to you, Ms. Brown, I think some of this took place before you took responsibility of it.
Yes, although a lot transferred to me because the responsibility transferred.
Yep. And I think we established as well that had the process not transferred to you, or sorry, a better way of putting it is if the appointment was made prior to the formation of Investment New South Wales, the employer would have been the Secretary of the Department of Treasury, correct?
Once the employment contract was ready to be signed, yes.
Yes. Okay. Investment New South Wales is appointed created 29 March. That's correct?
Yes.
And was there an interview around the 30th of March 2021?
Yes.
Was that interview conducted by NGS Global?
Yes.
And NGS Global at this time was the organisation that was appointed by Treasury to undertake the search?
That's right.
And you effectively, as Investment New South Wales, given the interview scheduled the day after you were formed, presumably did not seek to interrupt that process?
Precisely.
And that candidate that was interviewed was Mr. Cartwright?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And so he was established, he was interviewed on the AG role around that period of time on the 30th. Do you know why, or have you been able to ascertain precisely how he was identified as a person to go forward and interview? By any chance? To be fair to you, Ms Brown, we asked you this the other day, so I'm just wondering if the passage of time has meant any further information you have?
No, my only observations was that he came into the process after a first round of interviews were conducted. So he was a late entrant, so to speak.
Okay. And again, you don't have direct knowledge as to how he became a late entrant, do you? Because presumably you weren't involved.
No direct knowledge, no.
Okay. He's interviewed, and then presumably at some point he becomes the preferred candidate, or at least a preferred candidate. Do you know when that would have happened? Or was the interview more a case of that was confirmation that he was to become the preferred candidate? Is that a better way of putting it?
Yes, all I know is that by the time I came into the conversation shortly after Investment New South Wales was established, he was already established as the preferred candidate and contract negotiations had commenced. So that was my pick-up point.
So you pick it up from the point that contract negotiations are underway, but not completed.
Yes.
That's fair?
Yes.
At this point, I presume you would have sought to access or at least seek a briefing as to his qualifications, CV, resume, references, to the bare minimum, accepting, according to this version, that the decision already made for him to be the preferred candidate. But I presume you would have apprised yourself as to the person's biography, background, skills, qualifications?
I can't remember if I read a CV or anything, but I definitely asked to be briefed on all of that matter, most importantly because he was about to become an employee of the organisation, and I was very clear that I held the employer function for that, and I took it very seriously.
And so presumably you would have sought this advice from the agency whose job was the recruitment agency, amongst others?
Yes, and Ms West, because she'd been involved.
Yeah. And did you, I presume you would have also sort of asked for and seen the equivalent of the panel report that we've gone over in the Americas position?
I personally have never seen a panel report with respect to this appointment.
Sorry?
I've never seen a panel report with respect to this appointment, but it may be because by the time I picked it up that I just took on face value that the process was done and above board and no issues, and proceeded to have contract negotiations with this person.
Sorry, Ms Brown, just give me 30 seconds. Ms Brown, that might clarify something for us. I asked because we haven't seen one either, and I think we would have asked. Are you sure? So,
Well,
yes.
just to be clear, it should have been provided in the first SO 52 from last year and in the one that's still dribbling in from here. So it is unusual that we have not seen that.
Yeah, I believe we're returning documents this week.
So I'm not having a go about the docs, it's just that it should have been, because it should have been provided last year.
Well, it's possible that it wasn't in the possession of Investment New South Wales.
That's true too, yeah.
The opposition can continue.
But for what it's worth, we haven't seen one in the Treasury return either. Maybe we have to go and check again. But just to be very clear, when you were sort of effectively progressing forward in the process around the appointment, you hadn't seen the panel report, and to this day you still haven't seen a panel report.
I still haven't seen a report.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so you go forward with the negotiations commence. I think you described them last week as being protracted and, well, complicated is probably a better way of putting it.
Heightened.
Heightened. Can we establish that in respect to the other appointments made, with the exception of Mr. Barilaro, but I think I may have asked you this already, but I'll ask you again just in case I forgot. Were the other negotiations with the other stick candidates as equally as heightened and protracted?
They were more straightforward than this one.
Yeah, so what was complicated about this one?
I think, to be honest, the salary package and what that package was composed of, what component of it equates to base salary, as it's known, sort of base remuneration, versus what's cost of living allowance or even relocation expenses. By the time it was transferred to me, there seemed to be unmatched expectations between the candidate and what I saw as, I suppose, within my delegation to be able to sign off on. And I also think there was confusion within the organisation as to A, whether or not these roles had to be GSE compliant in terms of salary banding, and if yes, could a proportion of the salary be considered within band and then additional expenses be paid on top? All of that was very confused when I kind of picked it up. And so I suppose I had to deliver some hard messages to the candidate around some of the conversations that had happened previously weren't going to turn out to be the reality.
Ms. Brown, I might just need to unpack that a little.
Sure.
So let me just establish that obviously you had to negotiate over base salary, as you would with anyone, that's correct?
Yes.
And to the extent to which your own delegations turned on effectively where the base salary component fell within, that's fair?
Yes.
Because you don't have authority to give anybody what they want.
Exactly right.
And the process you have to follow does depend on which band they go into.
Right.
And that applies to a person who's band 4, band 3, band 2, EL1, EL2 to the clerk grades.
Any role within my organisation.
And your position is common to and is identical to every other public servant, correct?
Yes.
And so, to the extent to which perhaps expectations couldn't be achieved by base salary, then that sort of led to additional sort of, I guess, for want of a better term, accruitments that will be provided outside the base salary. Is that fair?
I think step one was, were the expectations around the entire salary package realistic at all? And then once we established the total number that was realistic and acceptable from a New South Wales government perspective, how do we package everything up, and how does the cost of living allowance work? How is it benchmarked against what other states do? So on and so forth.
And
so there are a number of steps.
One thing, Ms. Brown, that we have learned through this inquiry is that for each step along the way involves tax questions for under Australian tax law and UK tax law, correct?
That's right.
Okay, well, that was helpful. I guess the obvious question is, what were the candidates' expectations?
So when I entered the scene, I was briefed by NGS Global as to where the conversation was up to. They said that the number that the candidate was quoting was closer to 800,000, and I was certain that that wasn't going to be acceptable by any stretch.
The candidate's expectation was for a total package or a base salary of 800?
I'm not certain. I just was told that 800,000 was the number that was quoted, although to be honest, the first written piece of evidence that I saw in terms of what had been presented to the candidate actually said 600,000 plus cost of living. So there's a bit of maths involved there. Okay.
But nevertheless, we have a total package of 800-ish.
Or thereabouts.
Or thereabouts. Well, this committee and other committees have had opportunities before to establish where that would fall within the public sector. Best I could tell, that is close to
double what the Premier gets or thereabouts?
Oh, I don't know what the Premier gets.
Well,
More than what I get.
at the time, this was what, 2021?
Yes.
So at that time, I can definitely tell you that a Band 4 secretary of a department was on a maximum of 576, I think.
Sounds about right.
I think the Commissioner of Police was around that level, correct? So the only other person who I'm aware of, incidentally at that time, who was given an $800,000 plus package was the CEO of iCare, which is a different organisation. Both Scott and I and Wes have some familiarity with that process, but that's basically, if you had granted, that's a red herring, I won't go down. But if that basically, that would have made the Agent General the second highest paid public servant in New South Wales, for what it's worth.
That's possible.
And of course, did that catalyse some resistance from you?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, at that time, the clarity around these roles was probably clearer than they have been in more recent times. I was very clear that these were Government Sector Employment Act roles, and I knew what that meant. As CEO, the employer function sat with me, and so it was my decision alone, what salary was to be negotiated and what contract was to be signed. So I set about having conversations with the candidate and Ms West, who was assisting me, around the fact that numbers of that order of magnitude were not realistic, and then I sought to essentially bring the number down. Okay,
and at this point, I imagine as you go about seeking to bring the number down, was that, I presume, resisted by the Agent General candidate?
Yes, although, to be fair, he did say that he had to go away and speak with his family and see what was workable and what was achievable. So he was certainly willing to work with us to see what salary package might work for both parties.
Okay. Presumably at this point in time, there was also a reasonable expectation by the government that the job would be filled, correct?
Yes.
And I can only presume that as the new CEO of an organisation, this is one of the things you had to deliver?
One of the first things I had to deliver.
And so I can only assume that therefore that there would have had to be at least some form of update being provided to respective ministers and others about what exactly was the hold-up.
Yeah, so I was definitely resisting pressure to be rushed. Remember, I wasn't the secretary at this time. I actually had Mr Tim Reardon, who I reported into.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was actually really helpful because I could keep him updated on how the conversations were going, and that gave me kind of reinforcement and confidence to keep pushing back, I suppose. But yes, I did update some ministerial officers around it as well.
So at this point you're in the DPC, are you not?
That's right, yes.
So you obviously were keeping the secretary apprised?
Yes, regularly.
Regularly, yes.
Yeah.
And I presume that you were keeping the Premier's office? Were you keeping the Premier's office in charge or not?
I do recall giving the Premier's office at least one quick update on how the negotiations were going, yes.
Do you recall?
And it may have been that Mr Reardon was additionally giving...
Yes, I mean, Mr Reardon had one-to-ones with the Premier and I did not, but I had some good contacts in the Premier's office between the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff.
Okay.
Who were both
And which of
fantastic.
those did you brief?
I briefed both of those people. I don't know if it was at the same time or if I just called them in succession.
Thank you.
So do you recall when you did that?
It's again, phone records don't go back that far, but it would have been, I mean, we were having the conversations in April and May, so it was within that time period, perhaps before the middle of May, because that's when we started to brief positively in terms of the outcome having been resolved.
What did you tell the Premier's office at the time?
So I told both the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff of that the expectations of the candidate with respect to the salary were unrealistic, and I relayed the type of quantum that was being asked for, and they completely agreed with me that it was unrealistic.
When they say they completely agreed with you, what did they say to you?
They thought that salary was far too high to be justifiable.
Were you also talking to the Treasurer's office throughout this period?
I didn't brief the Treasurer's office regularly because they weren't my minister. However, there was, when the global network transferred into the Premier and Cabinet cluster by virtue of the fact Investment New South Wales was established in that cluster, I did undertake to make sure that they were kept up to speed, so to speak.
Well, they
on
would
a
have had
number of
some
matters.
carriage, I suppose, and interest in the UK, given it started with under them.
I think that's right.
And so did you sort of kept them in the loop as that, in the transition period through that? Is that
Yeah, I
accurate?
certainly provided at least one update.
So, but equally, you presumably would have needed to access their knowledge of the process anyway, given it commenced under them. You would have benefited from at least knowing what their expectations were, correct?
That's a good. I didn't actually, again, because I had a very strict interpretation of GSE, I didn't actually go to them and say, what do you think the candidate's expectations are? I just took it on face value when it landed on my desk. So, but they were, of course, they were interested in how it was going because they started the global network.
Well, Ms. Brown, in last week's, you did mention to us that, to be clear, circa October last year, when there was a renegotiation, the Agent General invoked the Deputy Premier and the Premier. I am wondering whether or not, in these earlier negotiations, whether or not the Agent General invoked the the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer.
Yes, it's fair to say that during the negotiations, particularly with the recruitment firm before I came in and was a bit more hard-headed about it, which is fair enough, I do believe that the candidate was using the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer's name a lot in terms of he thought that he had an understanding of what terms he'd be coming in on.
So that was a view that, sorry, you're negotiating in April, and from as early as April, either to you or to the agency, did I hear you correct?
The recruitment firm, yes.
The candidate was invoking the names of the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer?
Yes.
Okay, well, do you know, okay. And then you said you had one conversation with the Treasurer's office.
Yeah.
Presumably, was that to do with the salary negotiations?
Look, after the salary negotiations emerged as though they were going to be quite complex, and at that point, and they did end up being resolved, but at that point I felt like we could lose the candidate. I thought I would update the Treasurer's office about that fact, and so yes, I did mention that the candidate's salary expectations were unrealistic, and that I thought that they were.
You draw a distinction between the Treasurer's office and the Treasurer.
Yes, I never spoke to the Treasurer.
Okay, so who did you speak to?
I spoke to the Treasurer's Chief of Staff.
Okay. Okay, the Treasurer's Chief of Staff. I'm not going to seek to invoke their name, but the Treasurer's Chief of Staff in April last year. Sorry, there's a bit of...
I know what you're going.
No, we just need to...
It's the same
I'm
Chief
looking
of
at
Staff he currently
Scott
has.
because there were some... sorry, I'm not... I'm wondering... sorry, there was just a... I'm going to say rely on the Treasurer's Chief of Staff, and perhaps we can establish afterwards, because there was a bit of movement in the Treasurer's office at that period of time. To be clear, I think there was 3 in that period of...
That's gross, yeah.
As a result of the iCare scrutiny, from October through to...
Gotcha.
That's where it...
Yeah, so I'm just... That's not for you necessarily. I'm just going to be respectful and say at this point, the Chief of Staff, as of...
Well, now I don't know.
Okay, well, we can just rely on the fact that you called the Chief of Staff.
Yeah.
And this would have been circa April, May.
Yes. No, I phoned a particular person in the Treasurer's office from memory, and as you say, there are movements everywhere between the Treasurer, Premier and so on's office at the time. From memory, he was the Chief of Staff at the time, but I cannot 100% confirm that.
Okay, that's fine. It doesn't matter. But you spoke to someone senior in the office.
Someone very senior in the
Okay, who you
office.
presumed was the Chief of Staff.
And who can we confirm is still around?
They're still around.
Okay, I think we've sorted out who it is.
know it is.
Thank
I think
you.
we've established who it is. Sorry, it's, again, a bit of a crossover in terms of issues that we've pursued.
colliding, Mr. Mookie.
Okay, so you have a conversation with that person. What did you say?
I said I was in contract negotiations with the candidate for the Agent General role. In my view, it wasn't going fantastically at that moment, and I was nervous we were going to lose the candidate. In my view, runner-up candidate was still in play because I knew he was interested in the role, and in fact he ended up taking a role with us later. And I said we might want to just reorder our headspace a bit, that we should perhaps go back to that candidate. And he said that the opportunities between Australia or New South Wales and the UK were enormous, which is true, particularly when it comes to foreign direct investment, coming out of UK free trade agreements and all sorts, and that it's very, very important to have someone high calibre in the role, and we should probably rethink our approaches to salaries, and that a high salary is certainly justified.
Okay. So basically, they told you to pay the high salary?
They just told me to bear in mind of the importance of the role and the opportunities, and that if we're going to attract someone of high calibre, we needed to pay a private sector size salary.
Okay. I presume that you would have explained, or they would have already known, that this was a GSE appointment, correct?
Yeah, I assume so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just assumed knowledge on your part.
I had multiple conversations with the candidate that this is a public servant role and things are different over here.
Okay, so the Treasurer's office, senior member, let me just get this out of the way. Is the person who you were speaking to still working for the Premier?
Yes.
And is he currently the Premier's Chief of Staff?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so your conversation with the, I think we can now call that person the Treasurer's Chief of Staff at the time. We can establish that. Okay. Your conversation, you called the Treasurer's Chief of Staff and you explained that the negotiations, well, the expectations of the candidate were quite high. There was no ambiguity about that.
That's right.
You made it very clear.
Yes.
And you suggested that as a result of perhaps that candidate's elevated expectations, that there was an option to default to the next preferred candidate.
Yes.
Because there was more likelihood to reach agreement with that person in a manner consistent with the GSE.
They were very enthusiastic about the prospect of being a public servant in New South Wales, yes.
Okay, so they're confronted with the choice between two, and the advice you get back is that this role requires a person of high calibre, or words to that effect?
Whatever that means, yes.
Did you have understanding what that meant?
I always find it a strange phrase, but sure.
Okay. And then further, this person explains the importance of the New South Wales-UK trade relationship.
More, he actually referred to a trade delegation that he'd been on himself in some other role, and the opportunities that he saw when he was over there, all of which are completely valid and I agree with, and said, you know, we haven't had anyone in country for a long time, and let's make sure we choose someone of high calibre.
And then the conclusion of the conversation, or at least the most important takeout from it, is that the Treasurer's Chief of Staff tells you to effectively pay the person their higher expectations that's aligned with private sector, well, alleged private sector principles.
He tells me his view that the salary would be worth it, or relayed his view, but he couldn't tell me or direct me what to do with this candidate, and I was very clear on that.
Okay, so it was more advice or opinion for you to consider.
Strong opinion.
Strong opinion. Well, was it given emphatically, or was it emphatic?
Relatively.
Okay.
I still remember the conversation, so it was...
Well, Ms Brown, what else would you... was it an emphatic conversation?
That was all.
Basically suggesting that this candidate was of sufficient calibre that you should do whatever is necessary to try and accommodate his requests around salary. Is that accurate?
That would be a much more colloquial way of putting it than what he said, but I got the impression that I should consider the candidate's requests very seriously.
And for you to be able to, I mean, given that all the other sticks obviously were in the kind of band 3, that had been well established, that was not a surprise to anyone who applied, that was the case. I mean, what if you were to look at increasing those, what were you, you had to look at a sort determination. Like, I mean, what's your maximum? What did you have to do? What's your maximum delegations? Like,
Exactly. That's where it got
can you unpack all that for us?
really complicated. And so, I mean, the Agent General was the first role. So whilst every other Senior Trade Investment Commissioner has been, I would say, very straightforward to negotiate with. They know what Band 3 means. They know what the salary band is. They know that a cost of living allowance is also benchmarked. You know, it's not sufficient money to change the world.
Sorry to interrupt you, but when people applied for the role, it was clear that was the remuneration kind of clear, particularly the first one.
Well, it's very. That is a really good question. I might even take on notice what the role description said, because I felt like when the roles transitioned across from Treasury, the recruiter, through no fault of her own, was very unclear on what we could pay them, what were the rules around it, and I felt that my Treasury colleagues who'd come across were the same, partly because it's the Agent General, what does that mean? Is it within, like, they got a very long advice as to whether or not it falls within the GSE Act at all, and therefore the banding, salary banding, beg your pardon. So it was very confused. Once I determined, it didn't take much, that these are GSE Act appointments and they needed to comply, then it all flowed pretty straightforward from there with the subsequent appointments. And from the very beginning, the recruiter was able to say to them, this is the salary, take it or leave it. So this one was particularly vexed because nobody knew.
Ms Brown, you're at this point the Investment New South Wales CEO, correct?
Just.
Yes. And the CEO is classified as a Band 3 appointment.
That's correct.
And as a member of Band 3, it would be illegal for you to pay anyone Band 4, correct?
I didn't have I can't hire a Band 4.
And so it would be illegal for you to hire anyone at a Band 4 level, correct?
Yes.
And Band 3 at that point, now you're really testing my memory, but it was the maximum Band 3 appointment level would have been somewhere above 430.
487.
487. So the maximum you had the legal authority to give was 487 without someone else supporting your decision.
Without a sort determination.
Without a sort determination. So a candidate that's seeking an $800,000 job is inherently asking you to do something which you can't do.
Well, they wouldn't have known that.
But no, and look, to be fair, not everyone has expertise in GSE rules, but...
No.
I'm
still learning some of them myself, Mr. Mockey.
That's clearly a key concern for you, correct?
Yes, I either needed to talk to the DPC Secretary about supporting a sort determination with an eye-watering number, or I had to tell the candidate that the base salary had to be with 487 or lower.
And that's basically what happens, is correct?
Yes.
And look, just to be very clear, I'm not suggesting anyone who's an applicant need to become an expert in GSE rules, but the obligation to obey the GSE Act was yours.
Yes.
You obviously take that responsibility very seriously.
Yes.
And so therefore, if someone is asking you for something you have not got the power to give, you would obviously treat that as a cause for a protracted negotiation, if nothing else.
Well, because there was a textbook answer, which you've just articulated, it meant that I could just push back very clearly because, as you say, I couldn't have done it even if I wanted to.
But there is some form of a sort process, or is there not?
No, there's no sort determination at all.
Okay, but there was discussion of whether a sort process was required.
That's right.
Okay, and then ultimately at the end of the conclusion of that process, a decision is made that a sort process is not advisable.
Yeah, it was my decision not to pursue a sort process.
Okay, and then basically between the base salary and we've gone through how the cost of living allowance and others have been aligned, so I'm not really going to press you much further on that. But just to return to that conversation you were having with the Treasurer's Chief of Staff, you presumably at the point that you had this conversation were aware of all these constraints in your authority?
I think so, yes. Sorry, the timeline. We were trying to solve all these issues as I was having the conversations, so...
So at least at the time you're seeking the opinion or advice of the Treasurer's office and through his Chief of Staff, you know that there is a big question mark at least about whether it's even possible to give this person what they want.
I think the initial basis for my phone call was that a salary that high for any public service role is ridiculous.
Yes.
So I wasn't explaining to him how the GSE Act works and sort bandings and things.
No,
I was just
because
saying
to be
this is a
fair,
really ridiculous
An
number.
$800,000 request,
Yeah.
which is more than the police commissioner,
Yeah, for an
would, on
office
the face
of
of
8
it,
people or
seem
something.
ridiculous to anybody,
Yeah.
correct?
I'll just take you back at that point, perhaps, to you've talked about the 800,000 figure. You also referred to a lower figure in writing, $600,000 plus the
Yeah, that's
cost of living.
right.
Could you just tell us where did you see that? What was in writing?
The recruitment company emailed the candidate with a Word document, and again, I sort of inherited it, so I don't know how it originated, and it had bullet points as to a possible salary package, essentially putting it on the table. And it sort of said, as discussed, here is something that we could look at accommodating, and it had 600,000 cost of living expenses, and then went into a bit more detail around that, schools, rent, reasonable travel between the UK and Australia, that sort of thing.
And given the difficulties you've just described, did you come to any conclusion about how it was that we could look at accommodating, as you say, this? How had they come to that view?
Oh, I think somebody put that list together before there was any. So they did it wrong way around. They didn't.
Yeah.
They did it before there was clarity on what we could offer under the GSE Act. Whereas when I took over, I started with the base question of what are we, as Mr. Mookie said, legally able to offer.
Okay.
So that was the only conversation you had with the Treasurer's office about this matter?
Yes, just once.
Okay. So, and I presume this conversation took place either concurrently or after the conversation with the Premier's office?
It was after.
Okay. So the Premier's Berejiklian's office, I presume it was her office and not the Premier?
Oh, yeah, no, it was her office, definitely.
Okay. Had indicated to you that the expectations of the candidate, let's go with unreasonable? Yes?
A word along those lines.
Yep. But a similar call to a similar effect with the Treasurers suggested to you that it was reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Did you speak to Minister Reyes's office at all?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why at that point?
It was interesting dynamic because we're in the Premier and Cabinet cluster and the Premier was my senior minister.
That's right.
And he didn't have trade. So
Right. Sorry, I forgot that
he
little...
felt a little bit like he was the last to know in some of these conversations. That's not...
Yeah,
it's just
sorry,
fact,
it's an
nothing
important point.
disparaging.
He's not your cluster minister.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and at this point you're not a department.
That's right. I was an agency, yeah.
Yes, okay. Okay, and you
And at this
Still had
point,
a
Mr.
boss.
Barilaro was still your trade minister, correct?
That's
Oh,
right.
that's even a better point.
Yeah. So did you brief
Did you brief
Mr.
him?
Barilaro or his
Or
office?
did you seek to?
Did I seek... I don't think I did. Actually, no. I think it was such early days. Well, obviously, as I said, I've only spoken to, I can count on one hand the number of times I've spoken to the Deputy Premier himself. And I don't think I'd started my regular one-to-ones with Mr. Brayford yet. So I don't remember having a conversation with them.
Secretary Brown, we established that a contract is signed.
Yes.
Still not establish when was that contract signed, do you know?
21st of July.
So when you say elevated and protracted or heightened and protracted, it's 3 months. From April to July. It seems pretty protracted. Well, the obvious question before I make that statement is, was this the duration, as the length of negotiations, was that the largest duration for any of the stick appointments?
I think so. I mean, Ms. West was managing the day-to-day. I was the escalation point. So when I say they were heightened, literally every time they came to me, they were heightened, yeah,
Right.
because I was the escalation, not the primary negotiator.
But it takes 3 months to conclude what I'm now going to refer to as the first contract.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's when you say that is the reason why you say the contract negotiations were protracted because they had commenced with Treasury sometime in, or at least as early as March.
Yeah.
And then it took until July to conclude.
Honestly, I cannot say when they concluded.
Well, let's just go when the first contract was signed.
Yeah,
because we are about to
it was
ask
signed in July, but that could have just been getting the final pieces of tax advice and things. I don't know when the most difficult bit was concluded.
Well, this then brings me to the point, but I just think that we have to go with the fact that we're going to refer to that as the first contract and then the subsequent variations.
That's right.
I think is the way a lawyer would describe it.
You're a lawyer.
Former lawyer. So let's go through the first variation. We've established that there was another variation this year, but I'm going to go to the first one and then refer to the events of this year as a second variation, if you don't mind. And the reason I'm asking this is because we've just seen elliptical references in a variety of different documents to certain demands that were surfacing from July onwards.
Yeah.
So, is it the case that after the contract is executed, there were Mr. Cartwright or Investment New South Wales sought variations to that contract in respect to the remuneration package?
So Mr. Cartwright's appointment was announced on the 1st of October, and on the 23rd of October, yes, all of this is in emails, so it's...
We're still working our way through
Assume
it.
they've got them then.
Yeah.
Well, just assume also that perhaps we don't.
haven't had a lot of
we're
time
still
to look
working
at all
through
of
them,
these
Ms. Brown,
ones.
but we're
Yeah,
going to go
that's
on the basis. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, there are a lot of emails. That's why I can be so forthcoming. So between the 23rd and the 28th of October, yes, there were email exchanges relating to a possible variation of the Agent General's contract.
Okay, so let me just establish a few baseline facts here. When the contract is signed, there's a base salary, correct?
Yes?
I think, have we got that?
Yeah, 487.
487, so it's the maximum payable under band 3?
Yes, that's right.
At the moment.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. And then there was a super component, isn't there?
No, asked my team to be very, very clear on this.
This has been unclear in the docs. This is why I'm
Yeah,
asking.
so the explanation I have is, as Stephen is paid in the UK under UK tax regime, superannuation is not provided / deducted.
Okay. Was there a attempt by Mr. Cartwright to effectively obtain the same amount that otherwise would have been provided through super?
No, no, that wasn't.
But there was a cost of living allowance.
Yes,
And
that's the one.
I think you've told us before that's 112 at this point.
Yes, round it to 113.
113,000.
Yeah.
Was there anything else?
And then a one-off relocation allowance capped at 60,000.
Okay.
And there was also reasonable numbers of returns to Sydney. Is that is that included separately?
That's all included. That needs to be covered by the cost of living allowance.
Okay.
The team will correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Okay.
If we can just check that, sorry, again,
Yeah.
the stuff that I've seen looked like that
That's
was
a good
separate.
question. I'll just ask my team to check because
Yeah, that's
there is
fine.
an
We're not- yeah.
expense.
As I said, it's not actually been clear.
Yeah. Yep.
Is there a separate expense allowance, incidentally?
So
At this
the
point in
Agent
time?
General is entitled to expenses as per anyone would be, me included, in terms of if you're required to travel for work, that's covered, reasonable meal allowances if you're on a work trip, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. So that's the base package. That's the package that's agreed to
Yes.
at the first executed version of the contract. Is that
Right.
fair?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we established that the 23rd of October to the 28th of October, there are further conversations about remuneration, that's correct?
Yeah.
Now, just to be very clear here, this is announced, did you say on the 1st of October?
He's announced on the 1st of October. Yeah, it was a big day.
So, yes, you made that point a few times, Ms. Brown. I forget, sorry. But equally, state's in lockdown, correct?
Yeah. Yes. I came into the office because I was doing a webinar for the trade statement. That's why I remember it really well.
Okay, and to be fair to you, Ms. Brown, you told us that last week.
Okay.
And but to be clear here, the Agent General is physically in Sydney.
Yes,
Yes, because they haven't yet gone to London.
that's right. He
Okay.
went to London on the 31st of January.
31st of January, the Agent General goes to, I think you'd use the term in country.
Yeah, started in the London office is what I have written.
Okay, so what variation to the package did the Agent General seek in the 23rd to 28th period?
Okay, so he was predominantly in conversations with my general counsel around interpretation of the employment contract. So again, I just saw the summary version, but the nub of the issue is whether offshore expenses would be paid while he was still onshore.
How is it possible that a person can incur offshore expenses if they're onshore?
That's what I asked.
Reasonable question, Secretary. What were the nature of the offshore expenses that people...
I
Is that
think...
like rent for how, like what would normally be allocated
the
for
cost of
rent
living allowance, basically.
school fees?
Yes.
Yeah. And just to be clear, school fees are covered?
It's all covered in the cost of living allowance, so it's a bulk number and it covers a bunch of
But
stuff.
one of the offshore expenses that could be incurred onshore is future school fees to accord with whatever the UK enrolment timetable is. Was that one of the matters?
Not that I can recall, but here we go. Yes, future school fees. There you go.
Do you wish to take a bit more advice on that issue? If you need to, Ms Brown, you're welcome to.
I think in terms, again, in terms of the detail of what was going on, that was for my general counsel. I was more the escalation point.
But the proposition was...
So I basically had one meeting with the Agent General on this topic.
So I guess the question that was being raised, you said it was to do with the interpretation of the contract?
Yes.
So was the view that the Agent General was putting forward was that one of the expenses that should be paid for under a general expense claim was offshore school fees?
The way I understood it, it was more that if his salary was comprised of a base salary and a cost of living allowance, that his expectation was that the entirety of his salary, no matter how it was comprised or characterised, should be paid from the very beginning.
Okay, but I guess the question, what I'm trying to understand is the dynamic of the dispute, for want of a better term. Was the dynamic of the dispute a claim that a matter of school fees and other offshore fees should be paid for separately to the cost of living allowance?
Oh, I don't think so. I might just take that on notice and get a bit more advice.
Okay, do you mind doing that?
Because it's quite complicated.
That's fair. That is fair. But that's the nature of the predominant dispute in the 23rd to the 28th was a desire.
It was all around offshore expenses, yeah.
And the ability to access them prior to the Agent General actually arriving in London.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and presumably that view was resisted?
By me?
By Investment New South Wales?
Yeah, absolutely.
By you specifically?
Yes.
And that was the conversation that was taking place on the Teams format, correct?
Yeah, so I had the Teams call. I had two calls in my head muddled. The Teams call I was referring to was a call right at the beginning about salary, and it was with me and Ms West and the candidate. So I had that mixed up with this issue. So I'll correct the record now. This was an in-person meeting that I had with our now employee, the Agent General, and because he'd been having extensive discussions with my general counsel on the interpretation of the contract, obviously a legal matter, we put the phone on the table and my general counsel was on the phone.
Okay, but in that conversation, with the General Counsel on the phone in October, was one instance in which the Agent General invokes the name of the Deputy Premier and the then Premier?
Yes, it was actually the name of the Premier that jumped out at me, and I sent a follow-up text to my General Counsel to say, I didn't like that, I said I found it quite threatening. So, but yeah, it was at that point he was saying that he would talk to Michael Coates-Trotter or even the Minister or the Premier because the current outcome is not what I was offered.
Offered by whom?
I don't know.
So when you think he's referring to offered, it was not the offer that you provided with him, which was your signed contract. It was he was under the impression there was another offer in relation to the job?
I can't say.
But to be very...
Whether or not we're just misaligned on what the contract says or whether there was something else that he's referring to.
But just to be clear, it wasn't like you and he would were you and he disputing the interpretation of the contract you executed in July, or was it the case that he was referring to some other negotiation to which you have no knowledge?
That's what I can't be certain of, because when I did a follow-up debrief text to Mr. Carr, I said I found that quite threatening and I don't understand why he can't interpret the contract he signed. So in my mind, it was a difference in interpretation, but rereading the correspondence, I can't be certain of that.
Okay. And to be fair to Mr. Carr and to you, it's ordinary practice that all contracts say that the contract as agreed is the final agreement, correct? And that it's a pretty standard clause that any other negotiations are set aside by the entering into of this agreement, correct? And you were basically operating off that principle.
Correct.
Okay. And so in these conversations that takes place, there's emails, so this conversation in which the General Counsel's on the phone, that would have been in the 23rd and 28th?
That was on the 28th.
How did that resolve, that dispute?
There was no variation to his contract or the way that his contract was being interpreted by Investment New South Wales.
Okay. Okay.
So, sorry, even though he invoked the name of the Premier, etc., he didn't get what he wanted?
No.
Okay, cool. Just going forward a bit in time, we've established from Ms. Bell that there was another negotiation this year, was there not?
Yes.
And we'll start this time with the outcome of it before we go through how did that come about and when did it start. But the effect of it was to, rather than pay the Agent General cost of living, we instead decided to pay for his accommodation directly.
Exactly. So his cost of living allowance was reduced by $101,000 because that's the amount that we were paying rent directly to the landlord, and so that left him with a cost of living allowance of $11,800.
Okay, and the net effect of that would be to lower the person's income for the purposes of income tax, that's correct?
I'm no tax expert by any means, but I know that it created a more favourable tax position.
Well, Ms. Bell, to be fair, confirmed that it lowered, but it also resulted in the state of New South Wales having to pay the UK equivalent of fringe benefits tax or more amounts of fringe benefits tax. Is that correct?
That's right.
So effectively, the result of that particular negotiation was to transfer a tax liability from this individual to the state of New South Wales. That's fair?
That's a fair characterisation.
Okay. Can I just go, in respect to these two negotiations, sorry, just before we finish on the third, was there any other change?
No, just that one.
And when did it start and when did it end?
I believe it started, I don't think it was on the 1st of July. For some reason I have 6th of July. Anyway.
Can I just ask
new financial year.
1 second, yeah.
No, 1 July, sorry. I don't know. It's definitely 1 July 2022.
1 July 2022.
Can I just ask, Ms. Brown, how much is the FBT to liability to New South Wales?
So we only get an estimate from the tax office because, as you know, you get bills that you're never sure of from the outset. But the estimate is a maximum of $107,859.
Additional FBT?
Correct.
Okay. So that's pretty significant, yes?
It was more than I thought it was going to be, yeah.
Well, it's almost the equivalent of the actual full cost of living allowance.
Right.
And is that a deduction? Because there's an entity in the UK that we have that employs, that we use to employ the operations within Investment New South Wales in the UK. Is that a deduction to that entity?
I'll need to take it on notice.
Okay. Ms. Secretary Brown, in the course of either the negotiation that took place in October or the negotiation which took place this year,
Yep.
did you apprise the Premier or Minister about the incoming request from the Agent General?
The only minister who was aware of, so the first disagreement, no minister was made aware or got involved, no minister's office or anything like that. The second one, Minister Ayres was made aware.
Okay. Just to be clear here, the second one that says in July this year, sorry, the one that started this year?
Yeah, I signed the document on 16 June.
Okay, 16 June, yes. Just to be clear, Mr. Cartwright indicated to you that he would seek to escalate this to the Deputy Premier. Sorry. Well, the Deputy Premier and the Premier.
Said the Minister or the Premier?
Oh, the Minister and the Premier.
Or the Premier, yeah.
I was wondering why Mr. Toole would get called, but
No.
thank you for
Leave him
clarifying.
out of it.
Well, did he, to the best of your knowledge, did he actually do that?
Yes.
So Mr. Cartwright does seek the intervention of the Minister and or the Premier?
This time it was the Minister, not the Premier.
Okay.
Yes.
Minister Ayres at the time.
Yes.
So what? He contacted Minister Ayres?
Yes.
What, he called him?
WhatsApp.
WhatsApped. Okay. What did he say?
I don't have... I was forwarded the message. He basically said he's been trying to resolve this issue with Investment New South Wales. All other states seem to do it that way, where they pay the rent directly so that the tax situation is more favourable, which is true. And he's sorry, but he needs to escalate it, and can he please... I don't know the exact words, but...
He went over your head.
Yeah,
You're his employer and he went over your head.
that's right.
He went to the Minister.
Yeah.
Has anybody else ever done that?
No.
I can assume that you weren't pleased that Mr. Cartwright did that?
Oh, good, okay. What was the question, sorry?
Is there any additional information you wish to provide, Ms Brown?
It's just around the first dispute.
We might get to that. I might give you
Yeah, I think we should get to that because
So
it's the
I can only
headspace thing.
imagine, as any person who finds themselves as an employer finds their employee going above them,
Yep.
that perhaps you didn't welcome that intervention from Mr. Cartwright?
No, the good thing about it was that Minister Ayres contacted me and said, look, you can do what you like because Mr. Cartwright is your employee. I just want to give you a heads up, I've got this message. It might be a good idea to benchmark against other states and see what they do, but I'm not telling you what to do and I really don't care about the outcome, basically.
So, and look, to be fair, so let's just go through step by step. So Mr. Cartwright contacts Minister Ayres via WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Do you know when?
23rd of March.
23rd of March this year.
Yeah.
Okay, and presumably with a complaint about the manner in which his package has been structured
Precisely.
and seeking the Minister's intervention.
Yes.
And precisely, do you know a precise form of intervention that he sought? Was he asking the Minister to tell you what to do?
Yeah, he just said he was escalating it because he wasn't getting any cooperation from Investment New South Wales.
So he actually told you he was going to do it?
No. I think he actually told Kylie Bell that he was going to do it. Yes, not me.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. And so then he then sends a message to Minister Ayres on
Yep.
WhatsApp, and then you said Minister Ayres forwarded it to you?
Yeah, I think Minister Ayres called me and said, I just got this slightly strange WhatsApp message. I'll send it to you, but you can do whatever you think's best. I don't want to get involved.
Okay. And to be clear, Mr. Cartwright presumably would have had them access to the Minister's number from a relationship they may well have had, correct? I can't send a WhatsApp message to Stuart Ayres.
I know. He's quite approachable.
Should we get someone at Sussex
I guess
Street
you
to
were in
get
no
for you?
basis to know that, other than he clearly contacted him.
He clearly contacted him, yeah.
Okay. And it was referred back to you.
Yeah.
And so I guess the obvious question is, it was highly inappropriate for the Agent General to seek the intervention of the Minister about a matter related to his remuneration,
Highly inappropriate,
and almost unprecedented.
in my experience.
Okay. And resisted by you.
Well, what I did do, which is what the Minister casually suggested I do, although not in a pressured way, is ask Ms Bell to do some research on the way in which other states structure for, in terms of whether they pay rent or school fees directly in order to assist with tax treatment,
Okay.
which she did.
At this point in time, Ms Brown, as a person who's ultimately responsible for Mr Cartwright's management, did you conclude that you had a problem with Mr. Cartwright?
It wasn't looking great.
Did you seek to brief the Premier's office or Minister Ayres about the nature of the relationship that was developing between the agency and its Agent General?
No, I think Minister Ayres is fairly intuitive and had picked up that the relationship was a little bit difficult and that there was an impression by this employee that they had the elevated status for obvious reasons. I didn't discuss it with any other ministerial office.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's because any such issue, if picked up upon by Minister Ayres, it was really up to him to whether or not he wanted to brief the Premier or not, correct?
Yeah.
And obviously, ultimately, the Premier is responsible for the entirety of the public service.
Yes.
And we have seen reports emerge yesterday and this morning that the Premier was well and truly aware that there was a problem with Mr. Cartwright. Can we infer that he probably would have gotten that view from interactions with his minister?
Yes, I'd probably made a few passing comments to Secretary Trotter to be fair, but that was just, more of a whinge.
Okay, so you did, for want of a better term, whinge to the Secretary of DPC about the complexity of your management of Mr. Cartwright?
Well articulated.
And I presume that that would have taken place in your regular interactions with the Secretary of DPC?
It was so casual it could have been before or after a meeting.
But it wasn't major?
No, I didn't go to him with a problem.
Right, fair enough. But ultimately it is clear that at the same time Minister Ayres is being contacted directly by Mr. Cartwright to complain about his package. Sometimes you are alerting, be it in a very casual way, the Secretary of DPC that there are emerging issues or issues that have emerged.
Yes.
And presumably that could not have featured in the discussions that we were having, that basically the events of April and May, in which there are discussions at Stratco about the stick positions in general and the stick America's position in particular. It's possible that was in that context, but you wouldn't know, would you?
Wouldn't know.
Okay. And as a result, clearly at this point, it's fair to say that Minister Ayres was entitled to enough information to conclude on his own volition that there was a problem with the Agent General.
Yes.
You weren't withholding any of this information from the Minister?
No.
It wasn't like you were trying to manage it yourself and keep it away from the Minister?
I was managing myself insofar as very clear he's my employee. But yeah, I think I relayed to the Minister that perhaps the Agent General didn't understand that he was my employee.
Yep. But you didn't really need to tell the Minister, did you? Because Mr. Cartwright kind of solved that problem for you.
That's right. I think once he WhatsApped the Minister, it all became a bit obvious, yes.
Yeah. You didn't really need to be a detective to figure out that there's a problem. And so at this point, we can establish that certainly by 23rd March, Minister Ayres was entitled to conclude himself that there was a problem, and he may or may not have disclosed that to the Premier.
Sure.
Okay, but you have no idea?
No idea.
You never had any conversation with Minister Ayres afterwards in which he said to you, hey, I've told the... Okay, fair enough. I might just, if you don't mind, either give the government opportunities to ask some clarifying questions while I can see with a colleague, if you don't mind.
You got some questions, government members?
I do. Thank you. I just want to establish the timelines, if that's okay, Ms. Brown. So, in relation to the opposition's questions, you've inherited the negotiations with the candidate for the Agent General position. They were protracted. That candidate believed that they deserved more money. There was a differing view between perhaps the Premier's office and the Treasurer's office as to what that should be. Ultimately, though, it was settled that the lower figure, the top of the band 3, would be what was settled on, and that's what was actioned. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
They couldn't direct me even if they wanted to.
no. And so in that respect, even though the Treasurer's Office may have had a view about also what a public service position that is perhaps has an equivalent in the private sector may get in that private sector, ultimately it being a public service position, they weren't paid any more than that band of that public service position.
That's right.
So the opposition then, I guess, turned to some of the negotiations that were happening between yourself and the candidate. Well, sorry, I think they were the Agent General at the time around the allocation of allowances and the like. Now, at this time, the candidate, or sorry, the Agent General invoked, I think was the word that was used, the Premier and the Minister, and I know that it's been discussed Deputy Premier previously, but obviously that was, I think, past October 4, when Mr. Barilaro wasn't the Trade Minister anymore, and the new Deputy Premier wasn't involved at all, and that he wasn't invoked.
No, he wasn't the Trade Minister.
Okay. And so, despite the...
Just when you're done, we've got 5 more minutes. We only have one more question. So
Okay.
when you're done,
Yeah.
and then you can throw to you.
So, so in relation to, I guess, the suggestions that the opposition are putting forward, that the invoking of any names that the Agent General may have done was done in order to provide benefit to that person. In reality, they didn't get anything at all, and you actually, I think, I'll say, stuck to your guns, and there was no... That's correct?
So in terms of the original contract and the first variation that was sought, that's correct.
And so at most, what occurred was the Minister suggested to you that we should perhaps look at what other jurisdictions do with similar positions and similar posts, and that resulted in an investigation of those jurisdictions, working out that, in fact, indeed, the Agent General was right on one account, and that the rents for that position overseas were paid by the entity, and so that was accepted, and so that was adopted. Daniel, but everything else was, I think,
Can we
not accepted.
I believe the majority of other states did it that way, so we decided that that seemed fair.
Okay, so there was precedent set by the other states, and we just followed that precedent.
Yep.
Okay, I'll pass back to the
I might just clarify on this as well. Ms. Brown, I understand you went to Australia House in February, was it this year? Is that
No,
right?
I went to London in February.
London? Did you go to Australia House at the time? No, okay.
Remember, that was the time they didn't go to the office?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. But
Reason.
your understanding of Australia House and where the Agent General is situated is that effectively all the Agent Generals are in there together, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Agent Generals are all talking with each other about...
Have you seen LinkedIn?
I'm not aware of the LinkedIn comments or the like, but in the terms of
Lots
where
of group photos.
where the Agent General is situated, that he would no doubt be hearing this information from other Agent Generals that are located in effectively offices next to him
I'm certain
about
of it.
their arrangements, and that would have led to perhaps discussions that occurred with you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, questions from the opposition. They're just flowing freely at the moment.
Just a few more, just sort of details of clarification. Just because you were in the DPC cluster at the time that the contract was executed with Mr. Cartwright, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so presumably, if the total package exceeded band 3, did that require the Secretary of DPC at the time, Mr. Reardon, to be briefed?
No, we did get advice that it's within the rules to specify a remuneration that includes in-band remuneration plus an allowance. So because it was the remuneration was in-band, then I was authorised to sign it.
And then, Ms. Brown, you actually did sign it, though?
I signed the contract.
Okay, great, thank you. Look, just the other detail that I just wanted to clarify, you made reference to the fact that there was another candidate who you indicated to the Treasurer's office may be a acceptable alternative to Mr Cartwright, given his very high levels of expectation. I heard you correctly say that?
Yes.
And you also said that that person is now employed at Investment New South Wales. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
I don't want you to name the person, but what do they do?
So we have senior trade investment commissioners. Then the idea is that they sort of have a 2IC, who's called a TIC, trade investment commissioner,
Yes.
and they're a TIC for UK and Europe.
Okay, thank you. I'm fairly positive that's my last question. I know Ms Sharp does have some, but I just wanted to say thank you, Ms Brown, for listening to my very extensive questions throughout 3 hearings.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to ask about something that was reported earlier today, and that was there was a report of an email that you sent on August 14, 2021, that said that you'd been asked to include 2 candidates in interviews for this India and Singapore-based roles.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you not a lot, just a couple of questions on this?
You may.
I wanted to ask firstly, who asked you to include the 2 candidates in the interviews?
So I think by using that language, I was essentially saying that each of those candidates had requested that they be included in interviews.
Right, so it wasn't the case that there was sort of a directive or anything like that, but how did you become aware of those 2 candidates?
So the Deputy Premier gave me a call. That was one of the other calls.
Number 2 of 3 calls that you've ever had. Yep.
And said...
the Deputy Premier at the time being Mr Barilaro.
That's right.
Yep.
Because it was in August 2021, and said, am I able to refer the stick opportunities onto people? And I said, of course, Deputy Premier, you can refer it to whoever you like. And he said, fantastic, there are 2 people who are going to give you a call just to, see how to apply. I said, of course, that's fine. And he texted me their numbers. So then their numbers were in my phone. So then there was a back and forth as to what time would be convenient for me to give them a call. And I called each of them and let them know the process.
And just to be, and those 2 people were, can you just tell the committee, please?
The individuals' names?
Yep.
I don't think I can discuss.
Right, oh, okay, well, they were publicly reported.
Right.
So why don't I ask you,
Okay.
were they former MP Jodie McKay?
Yes.
And former MP Prue Goward?
Yes.
And it was a result of Mr Barilaro, but Mr Barilaro contacted you in the first place and said
I'd like to refer the
you'd like to
opportunity.
refer them, and so it was
Yes.
your expectation then that you would be required to interview them for the role?
Interestingly, I was very clear at this point, again, that these were Government Sector Employment Act roles, so I knew that I didn't have to interview them, but I definitely thought that each of these individuals would be really interesting people to interview, and that they would have, something to say about the opportunities, so I was keen to include them on the list.
Can you just clarify to us where you were up to with the other role? So there'd already been interviews, is that right, for those roles? Can you just tell us where they were coming in the timeline of the process?
Sure. So we'd actually already had sort of approximately half a day of interviews for the ASEAN and the India and Middle East role the month prior, actually. So it's certainly fair to say that they had come in late. They were a late consideration.
And look, to be fair to those candidates, they may not have known that, correct?
That they were late. I don't know. They probably didn't know.
Right. We're not alleging that.
Look, Ms Brown, I misled
And
you.
also, if I can just clarify as well, neither of those candidates were successful applicants.
Neither of those candidates were ultimately successful.
Do need to
Brown.
move on to government questions in a sec.
Are you okay with just 1 or 2?
Keep going. Do you have anything further?
I did have plenty, but...
Couple? Just 2 more?
Sure.
Thank you, Wes. I did...
I know.
I have been keeping time. I'm
Ms Brown, I
conscious of
misled you.
where
I
we're up
misled
to.
you when I said they were my last questions. I apologise.
He does that a lot.
I have been provoked.
It's an encore.
Greatest hits returning one last time.
Just the only thing is, this conversation presumably would have taken place with you and the Deputy Premier in August, correct? Because given you sent that email in August.
The phone call? Yes.
And I can only presume that was the only incidence in which the Deputy Premier contacted you directly to apprise you of an interest of two candidates or other candidates?
Correct.
Okay. And incidentally, this is happening in August. At the same time, there's conversations about the preparation of a cabinet submission to turn these into ministerial appointments, correct? Which was happening in August.
Yes, although those conversations commenced later in August, because remember I verbally offered a candidate the role on the 12th,
Yes.
and then started getting asked for advice in early September as to the conversion.
Okay.
And then the decision ultimately ended up being made on the 27th of September. So this was still quite a bit before.
Okay. Thank you. That clarifies. And thank you again. That was my last question.
Okay, great.
sure?
Questions from the government
Checking
members?
Mr. Mookie's finished.
Mr.
No,
Fang,
100%.
your turn.
On your
Thank you.
questions, Mr. Fang.
Well, that's true. Ms Brown, again, thank you for appearing. Just to follow on, I think, from where Mr Mookie finished off, which is obviously Ms McKay and Ms Goward's applications to Investment New South Wales for those roles. Now, certainly we've heard that I'll say late applications are not outside the norm. Indeed, Ms West's application herself was after there was already a shortlist, I believe, and she had been emailed that shortlist with the, I think, psychometric information that we discussed with Ms Bell on Friday.
It was a candidate progress report, yes.
Yes. So it wasn't unusual in that instance that was that occurred in the process. Neither of those candidates were successful, as my colleague
That's right.
said. That's correct. And in that instance, was there any political pressure applied to you to review, reverse, to relook at that decision?
No.
So even though the Deputy Premier had, at the Deputy Premier at the time had approached you with these two names, one from obviously a coalition partner of the Nationals and one from the Labor Party. So, you know, obviously there was a mix of political persuasions within the two candidates. There ultimately was no political pressure to appoint one and not the other, or both of them, or neither of them. It was completely an apolitical decision that was left to you and the public service to look at the relative merits of each candidate.
Yeah, at this point, they were very strict GSE Act appointments. That's how I was interpreting them, and I wasn't engaging with any ministers on them at all, which led to a very different outcome anyway.
Okay. Given that Mr Barilaro at the time was the Trade Minister, do you think there is an expectation that if he sees or identifies suitable candidates for perhaps being put forward, like Ms McKay from the opposition, that he do so, given that, you know, he obviously wants to have the best people in the role despite what their political persuasions are?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I could have actually given the Deputy Premier more updates when it came to how the recruitment process was going for these roles. It's just the line between, you know, for these sort of high-profile appointments, the line feels very invisible, so I was never sure exactly how much updating to be giving. But the fact that he referred two candidates to me is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, and not outside the realms of what would be considered reasonable.
No.
And I guess the other part of that question that I was asking was, as the Trade Minister, you would expect, as the CEO of Investment New South Wales and the Secretary of that department, that if a minister had identified that there was a suitable candidate or somebody that would be a potential candidate, that they would refer them to you to be able to, I guess, provide them some insights around the role, provide them some more information so that they may start the process with you or the recruitment agency around that role?
For sure.
Thank you. I just want to turn now back to Mr. Mookie's initial, it might have been Ms. Sharp's initial questioning, or Mr. Mookie, or a melding of the two. I'm not quite sure as to who it was. We obviously referred to an email that was sent from Investment New South Wales to a number of people. It was page 19 of the tender bundle from Mr. Mookie. Volume 1, I think, as opposed to volume 23 or 24, which I think we're probably up at about at the moment. Now, obviously, the email went to a number of people, and I can see where the opposition are leading with around the name of somebody who obviously received the email. But I guess the first thing would be is that there's been a lot of emphasis put on the fact that one person received that email. It would be reasonable to say that that person may or may not have read that email. I mean, you probably don't have to answer that, but I'll put that position to you as I'm progressing this line of questioning. The second thing is that we heard on Friday that Labor shadow, and I can't remember who the Labor shadow is for trade. I don't think they've been very visible at all.
Chantavong.
Thank you.
Very high profile.
Yeah, very high profile shadow minister might have put a press release out about the Sticks role around the same time. Is that, are you aware if that perhaps played a role in the minister wanting these positions advertised early?
I think it's just, we'd said a number of times that we'd kind of get going on all of them and be progressed by the end of the year. Maybe even said it in estimates. So I think he just didn't want things to clock over into 2022 and not have been started. Just a bad look.
So here's the bit that I'm, I guess, really struggling with, and perhaps you can help me here, because I'm not sure that the opposition has really drawn the parallels, and certainly I can't in my mind. Let's say, for example, that the person did read the email and they certainly were aware that the minister was going to advertise the role. Can you perhaps explain to me how materially it provides an advantage to a candidate to know that the minister may or may not advertise a role, before the end of 2021, so that they can be added? Like, how does that help them be added to the shortlist? How does that help them pass the selection board? How does that help them gain acceptable reference checks? And how does that help them to become the preferred candidate for the role? Because I'm really struggling to draw parallels as to how being included on this email here was materially beneficial to Mr. Barilaro eventually becoming the preferred candidate for the role?
I don't know, to be honest. And I mean, this is a role we've been to market for before. And we need to resolve tax issues and the like before we went to market again. It was widely known that we wanted to roll out the global network as quickly as possible. And in fact, when we launched the trade statement, we said that. So I don't think it was strange or startling that this role was going out by the end of the year, personally.
And other than, obviously, there was the political component around the ad, which was obviously Ms. West was in charge of the advertisement for round one, where she didn't include political for the Americas role, which ultimately, I guess, would have been a benefit to her when she applied, but it seemed to have been included in all the other advertisements that had rolled out for that round one, I guess, phase. But when the phase two came about, the ad was substantially the same ad as round one. There really is no material benefit to having knowledge around this email or not.
The role description was the same. So anything that was released, I suppose, was already in the public domain because the role had been advertised before.
So would it be fair to say that potentially we're just seeing a bit of muckraking and dirty politics from the opposition here?
That's not for me to comment.
Thank you.
I'm done, Chair.
I might just have one question to Ms Brown that occurs to me from that interaction.
No, it comes from a
with respect to
professional,
Mr Barilaro's evidence before was that in terms of the brief that was sent to him
Yeah.
about Ms West
Yeah.
and her role as a candidate,
Yeah.
he reiterated to this committee that he had no recollection of that brief at least, or of seeing it.
Yeah.
Do you have in any of your interactions with him, did you ever raise Ms West as the Stick America's role?
I gave him a very quick heads up that there was a brief on its way to him that had a successful candidate named within it, and he should look out for it.
Okay, but you never discussed who that
I never
successful
discussed
candidate
the person, which in hindsight might have been an error.
was? Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Thank you. That's
Ended on the word error. That's so disappointing.
We could, any other...
Anything else you'd like to say?
I would like to, yes, thank you, Mr Mookie. I would like to particularly thank my team at Investment New South Wales, who have worked every weekend for the last 7 weeks and will probably work more. And I think the amount of, blood, sweat and tears that goes into public accountability and being able to respond to a committee such as this should never be underestimated, and I'd like to thank them.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for your attendance over the 3 days, and for being so open with information and helping us as much as you can. So that's the end of our session, our hearing for today. The questions that you have taken on notice, the Secretariat will be in touch with you about it. Of course, you have 21 days to get those back to us. Thank you very much, Ms Brown, and that is the end of